All right. Excited to be here today with my new friend, Dan Melnick. He's the CEO of Sonicbids and Advanced Music Technologies. He successfully led Sonicbids, overseeing their growth strategies, partnerships, acquiring the brand from cast and crew backstage to modernize its offerings for today's musicians and venues. And we were talking a little bit backstage just about the state of the music industry, especially for indie artists. It's transformed so much. It's kind of a different ballpark. So I'm really excited to have him on the podcast today to share a few of the lessons and recommendations that he has for artists who are taking their music career into their own hands in today's industry. So Dan, thank you so much for taking time to be on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Awesome. So I gave Dan a quick heads up before we got started. I just got back from our Modern Musician retreat in Puerto Rico. We were there for about 10 days and it was absolutely amazing. But, I'm in reintegration mode right now. So if I say anything offbeat, if I accidentally slip up or I reveal the fact that I'm secretly a lizard person, then that's the reason. It's because of the lack of sleep.
You can't put that on the internet, man. People will believe you.
You're right. Weird. No, the lizard. I mean,
there's an algorithm out there. They're going to find you now.
Yeah, lizard people. Like, I'm going to be on the official list now, along with Mark Zuckerberg and the other obviously lizard humans.
There was some Halloween Hulu thing I was watching recently about a guy who was obsessed with that and he lit a building on fire. So watch out. Let's make sure you take your home address off the podcast.
Oh man. Yeah, gosh, what's the best way I can prove that I'm not a lizard person? If I remember correctly, the giveaways are you love outer space. I do love outer space, so that's a demerit against me. I think it was green eyes maybe or blue eyes, fast reflexes. Yeah, man. Now I'm starting to wonder, am I a lizard person?
So athletic astronomers, watch out.
Yeah, I think I need to do some self-inquiry to observe, am I human? Well,
this is starting out incredible, man. I'm so psyched to be here. Oh, I love it. It was great.
Well, Dan, I would love to connect a little bit more and hear a little bit more of your story. Starting, working with Sonicbids. Could you share just a little bit for anyone who this is their first time connecting with you? Can you introduce yourself a little bit and share your story about how you became the CEO of Sonicbids?
Sure. I've been a music industry lifer. I went to school in Connecticut at Quinnipiac for mass comm. And I guess it wasn't until my senior year when I was a musician, a lot of us get into this stuff because you perform, that I wanted to work in the music industry. But unfortunately for me, there was no really music industry program at my college. So when I graduated, I, like so many other people who maybe too late in their lives decide to get into this, didn't know enough about who even did what to navigate the scene or even where to put an application in for a job post-graduation. I remember going to the red light management offices on Wall Street when I was 22 with a resume in hand because I couldn't get in touch with anybody there. And I showed up and the door guy was like, no, bro. I was like, well, I tried. So I kind of had my back against the wall. To make a longer story short, I started my own company with $0, booking independent musicians at small venues across New York City. I started at a small club, which is still there, 169 Bar, but they don't do music anymore. And then expanded to a venue called Uncle Mike's, which is also not there anymore. And then it kind of exploded from there. And we were doing 8 to 10 shows a week. We had dozens of venues in New York alone, and we expanded to Boston, Philly, and San Francisco. And we had thousands of acts. Like I mentioned, probably about 150 venues at our peak, 15 bookers. And we worked with Grolsch and Coors Banquet on some year-long concert series. And around 30, I was getting a little tired because I was at the venues 3 to 4 nights a week on top of working full-time, because that's kind of what it takes in that live realm of, you still have to work during the day. So I kind of got burnt out, and I wanted to see how the other half lived after running my own business for about a decade. So I just put my resume out there in the ether, and I was lucky enough to get snatched up by Sonicbids within 6 weeks of doing so. And it was nice. When I started, it was kind of oh my God, I don't have to do everything. This is insane. It was my first time working in a larger office. And I watched my GM at the time struggle with all the things that I used to struggle with, from accounting to HR to tech issues and so on and so forth. And my only job when I first started was to get more venues and festivals on our platform. But I got really good at that and expanded my role as partnerships director within the first year. And then over the pandemic, we unfortunately lost some people because that's, we're live music tech. So that's where it goes. But soon after that, I took over as GM. And throughout this whole journey, there's been a lot of technological improvements that I was asking the parent companies to make over the years. And it didn't seem like they were going to do that. So left us at an impasse. So through discussions, it was brought about that it was a possibility for me to acquire the entity. And I moved forward with my new co-founder today to acquire the entity with our other entity, Advanced Music. And yeah, here we are. We're about 4 months after the acquisition at this point, and we're really excited, and it's a rush, and yeah, we're pretty happy about it.
Awesome, man. Yeah, so it sounds like it's still very, very fresh at the time of recording this, about 4 months or so. And yeah, talking about when you say you're like modernizing the offerings, a lot has changed, in the past 20, 50, 100 years as it relates to live music. So yeah, I'd love to hear from your perspective. First of all, for anyone that maybe has heard of Sonicbids, but they're not totally familiar, could you share a little bit about like what's the main problem that Sonicbids is here to help solve? And I'm also curious to hear kind of the modernizing version of what you're looking to do there as well.
For sure, yeah. For those unfamiliar, Sonicbids is like a legacy brand. They were really the first place for artists, not only independent artists, but artists in general, to represent themselves online. That's how old it is. I think it popped up around the same time as MySpace. It may even like predate MySpace or launch around the same time. And not only was it the first place for artists to represent themselves online, but it was also the first place for artists to be able to submit electronically to different opportunities around the music space in general, and particularly in the live music space. And the term EPK, which was at one point, at least copyrighted by Sonicbids, electronic press kit was, so we were the original EPK. And a real quick way that I say what it is like LinkedIn Premium for musicians. That's kind of the way I look at it today. And there's definitely has to be a lot of improvements. Historically, it was acquired by Backstage around 2013, and there really hasn't been much improvement to the software since that acquisition. And that's what we are doing now.
Cool. So Sonicbids is sort of like the original EPK, and is, in some ways sort of like a business card for you and for your music, and is a platform where you can find opportunities, especially live gigs, to submit for. Awesome. And I'm curious, having a lot of perspective, both in terms of like what got us here as a music industry and kind of where things are at right now and where they're headed. I'm curious what you think right now are some of the biggest challenges that artists are facing in this market, and how you're positioning the new and improved Sonicbids to be able to help solve those.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I love talking about this stuff. The problems still exist. I just got back. Amondo is actually happening right now in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And I have some other people there repping our company. I was there on Monday, Tuesday. But the first panel I walked into, they were mentioning the same issue that has existed for a tale as old as time, as you were kind of referring to earlier, is how artists get gigs, which is bananas because it's 2024, almost 2025 at this point. And I think the speaker mentioned like Rockwood in Boston, and she was saying there's 1,500 slots 1,500 artists that want 500 slots available in the quarter or the month at this particular venue. And the same question was asked by the moderator of like, so how do these artists get these gigs? So I think it's a two-sided coin here, right? And it's a two-sided issue, a two-sided problem. One, you're talking about inventory, right? That's one side of it, right? And that's in this particular issue, which is also a microcosm of the overarching issues in the space, is there is less venues nowadays necessarily. I don't believe there's less opportunities, but I do know that there definitely is less venues for independent artists. Especially in Boston, which is probably why why Rockwood's dealing with such a demand, because with the Live Nation, the AEG Bowery, Walmartization of music venues, there's less spaces for independent artists to work. And there's a reason for that too. And this is something that I think is partially God, this is such a long lesson. I feel like I'm teaching the class. I went over this last week. What used to happen back in the day was you would have a regional or national touring act come through, right? But you pair those touring acts with the best local support, right? And that would help that local support gain more fans. But that doesn't happen anymore because when you have the Live Nations and AEG Boweries, and look, there's nothing, I'm not even talking trash about Live Nation and AEG Bowery. This is just the way it is. And I'm never personally going to hate on a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, right? I mean, like, they've done their job, right?
They're all lizard people.
Yeah, they're definitely the blue-eyed gymnasts out there. But because of this, what happens when you have these rooms, even like the moderate sized rooms, like the 500 cap rooms, right? You need the artists that are going to sell those tickets for those rooms, right? So those are all agency represented acts. But the way that these agencies work, that when you're also booking these headliners, they tack on their agency represented support and openers, right? Which is, seems like an obvious thing, but it deletes inventory for independent artists to be able to find gigs at those more reputable institutions. I think New York is one of the better spots for independent music. Boston is really lacking for stages. That's what it is. Available stages, available inventory. So we're talking about the demand, right? There's that on that end. Now, I also know from my own research that that's not necessarily the case. There is inventory out there, but people need to think outside the box a little bit on how they start to stretch their legs and broaden their horizons with physical live music opportunities, right? So on-site opportunities. So there's, if you're in the Northeast, there's plenty of stages in the Northeast, but you have to think like, oh, I'm not just going to go to the normal ticketed spots. There's restaurants, bars, breweries, distilleries. There's vacation space spots. There's vacation locations. I think it's a combination for these independent artists and how they should plan their year, also compared with the supply and demand of those spaces, right? To really hone in on what I believe is an ideal way to plan your year, right? So if let's say you live in Boston or New York in the Northeast, because that's where I'm at. Actually, I'm in Connecticut right now, so I'm square in the middle, and I'm an independent artist, right? So per quarter, you want to play your home base, right? I mean, and the old way of thinking about it was like a once a month thing was, don't do more than once a month because artists are playing every week. Playing every week is lunacy. Unless you're like a cover artist or a jazz artist and you're providing a service of entertainment and getting paid to do that. But if you're an independent original musician trying to grow your brand, right, you aren't going to get those paid opportunities as much, right? So what you want to do is you want to focus on building your audience, creating content around building your audience, because we are in that technological age where you have the advantages of, even this cool thing I meant, the app around right now. That's a nice, cool little tool. There's thousands and thousands of technology tools out there to help artists start to build content around their own personal brands. And that is how you should fill that other time that back in the day, the playing once a week, right? Even asking your own fan base to come out once a month in that given market is a lot. It creates a supply and demand issue with your own personal fan base, right? You're cannibalizing your own fan base. Unless you're doing like an underplay residency, but even that you're at that point, you've already kind of solved that issue of, gaining your own fan base and building up that momentum. But back to the planning of the year, play your own market once a quarter. And then in the summers, you should be playing festivals, right? In the winters, go play ski towns. And then the other places in the summers, go play out, in like Lake George or like Cape Cod, right? Try to find these opportunities that are going to put you in front of an audience that you wouldn't usually know of. And those opportunities do exist. I think one of the issues too on the festival side is people think it's just like every artist wants to play Madison Square Garden. Like every artist wants to play Bonnaroo or Coachella. It's just not realistic. But there's hundreds of independent festivals out there, right? Like there's Main Street USA festivals that would love to have you around the country, not only just the US. And you got to go out there and find them and apply. I mean, luckily for Sonicbids, one of our strong points that we have is we have one of the largest vetted directories of opportunities. And that's one of the things that I've found even through the pandemic is opportunities that I didn't even think existed because I had to get creative on where these opportunities are. And they exist and they're out there. And I would recommend, Googling them or jumping on our platform and taking a look at them. I'm sorry. And I'm monologuing now, but part of what they said in that panel, to go all the way back to the beginning of the story, is they're like, approach the talent buyers and say, look, I have 50 really good friends that are going to come out and support me. I had a chuckle to myself when they said that, because I was like, I cannot believe it's 2024 and we still are, whether it's a phone call or a piece of like snail mail or an EPK from the past, we're still telling these promoters like, oh, I'm good for 50 people. Like, it's crazy to me. It's silly, honestly. And there's ways to be better at that, I think. So.
Yeah, got it. So it sounds like kind of the big opportunity that exists right now. In some ways, like the market has shifted where certain opportunities aren't as abundant as they used to be in terms of some of these local opportunities that there are companies that are coming that have a foothold on these concerts. And so some of those aren't quite as abundant as they used to be. But, from your experience, there are a lot of opportunities if you know where to find them and you're actually actively applying for them. And yeah, I think there is something like really powerful just about the concept of like opportunities and about the numbers game of when there is an opportunity, then that opportunity, there's a percentage, there's like a conversion rate, there's like a number of opportunities that will say yes to you applying for the opportunity. But if you don't apply, if you don't have any opportunities, if you don't apply to them, then it's 0%. Like you have zero opportunities. Maybe you could share a little bit more about these opportunities and let's use Sonicbids for an example, that these opportunities exist on this platform. For an artist who's listening to this or watching this right now, how do they know which are the right opportunities for them or which ones to apply for? What does like a general strategy look like for them that you see the artists who are getting the best results? How do they look at the overall strategy?
Yeah, it's a great question. And also, it goes off what we were talking about before. Like, these problems haven't changed. They're still the same problems. Like, artists, I think it's the same cliches, which is funny. Again, it makes me chuckle over pre-pandemic, even 20 years ago, of artists being like, I can't make a living from performing my art. And like, yeah, you can't. Like, that's unfortunately like the reality of it. You cannot make a living performing your art. And that hasn't changed since the fucking 70s. Sorry, I don't know if I can curse on here, but it hasn't changed because it's still been the same answer to the same question, which is you have to build your brand up as a small business, right? To be creating the local economies that you can then bring to other locations to then benefit off of those economies. It's not a scenario where, oh, like I want to go sing a bunch of songs about my ex and why aren't people paying me for that? Right now, like there's great art out there. And unfortunately speaking, even as a promoter, I saw incredible artists play in front of empty rooms, right? But that's the way it's going to be unless you look at yourself as a small business. As entertainment providers, it's completely separate, right? If you're playing covers and you're playing jazz or classical in like a Italian restaurant, that's completely separate and outside of my scope. And look, I wish it wasn't that way. I really do. And I'm not the gatekeeper or one that made the world the way it is, but I think that sometimes artists need to understand that this is the way the world is. And if everybody got paid for playing their original music, then everyone would just do that, right? So it's Darwinistic out there. It's competitive, but there are ways around that as much as there was back, 30 years ago, as much as there is today. But if anything, there's even more today. The opportunities that exist, even in in the realm of Sonicbids particular, like you were saying before, like we have a very solid foothold of what I would call at least the tentpole venues in every major market in the US. We've pulled back. We were a worldwide entity in my strategy over the last few years. We've pulled back massively outside of the US and Canada. But you have these tentpole venues in every major city, every major market. And obviously, if you're living in the suburbs of a major city, that is your home market, is that major city, right? But you also have to own your own backyard, which is important, which is also something that we've been expanding on within our reach of vetted opportunities. So we have over 1,500 different opportunities that cycle through our site on a yearly basis. But I think what you can take from that is, obviously, great, market myself, use our site, right? But if you don't find it there, you're going to have to find it somewhere on your own. And there are the opportunities out there. Even if you make it yourself, go to the local bar. If you're really in the backwoods somewhere, right? Maybe you're like 3 hours out of a major city. Go to the local bar, buy a PA, bring your fan base, right? If you don't have a fan base, then work on your fan base. I think that's another part of it. Like, don't go play out until you're ready to go play out. Like, what does ready mean? The data that I tracked when I was a promoter for 10 years in New York City, the average New York City independent artist at the venues that we booked, which ranged from 75 cap all the way to 1,000 cap, was seven. Seven tickets were sold. And our goals, yeah, it's kind of crazy. And our goal year over year was to improve on that seven, right? And we did that, but seven is the real number. You had, 50 artists that were selling 50 tickets, and you had a ton of people who were selling zero, right? Who don't really understand what it is to do, right? And look, as you can also define the word promoter as well. And I think that is the worst word in the music industry, not because it has a negative connotation, because it never really fully defined itself correctly. The Bill Graham era, the 60s and 70s that we're talking about, yeah, you would find local acts and promote them and bring them to events and you get an audience out, but it's not the 60s anymore, right? In that way, because there's so much opportunity, the information is so readily available, and there's way more live opportunities out there. So there's a supply and demand issue on that side of things. That the word promoter today, if you're going through a promoter, which are oddly few and far in between, which is, you can take that as you want in every given market. And I think that actually hurts the ecosystem of the local live music industry. I think promoters are good for things, but then you can just go directly to the venues themselves. But now I'm rambling. I forgot where I was coming from. But the seven, right? So where are you ready? I would hope if you are about to play your first live show, or if you've been playing live shows and you're not selling, or you're not bringing out, 20 people to your events, right? It's probably, you should refocus up on either your writing or your promotion and wait until you're ready to go out and actually, have that consistent 20 tickets at your event. And look, some people don't want to hear that stuff either. I know that. And artists don't want to hear it. Artists are idealistic and they want to go, where's my crowd? Where's my money? Here's my art, right? But I just think it's an important thing to be realistic about how economies work, right? The Rolling Stones don't play Madison Square Garden because the people who are booking at Madison Square Garden really love the Rolling Stones. They're playing there because they're going to sell the effing tickets, right? That's why this whole thing exists. The ecosystem around live music is based on vendorship. It's based on food and bev sales. The way that even on a smaller level, and also all the way up to larger levels, that tickets basically offset the talent costs, right? And that's kind of the way it is. And the only reason that these venues are having this music is to get to sell more food and bev. They're not doing it to sell tickets. They're not profiting off of tickets. And I talked about things you were talking about earlier, things that I can and can't speak to. I can say that the numbers behind the even largest promoting entities, the percentage of their profits that come from tickets, I think would blow people's mind. With all the things that are going on in Congress, like Ticketmaster and all these things, it's a minimal percentage of their focus because it's not really where they're turning the dollar. And at the end of the day, it's a business. Even the venues are businesses, the artists are businesses. That's the way it is.
Super interesting. So what I'm hearing you say is that one thing that is a common myth or a common mistake, and it's easy to fall into because we're artists and we have music that means a lot to us. And art is sacred. It is special. But as it relates to your business and as it relates to your shows and the tickets and the opportunities, it's not just about the music. It's more importantly about the community. It's more about your fan base, more about the people that are going to buy the tickets to come out to it. The only way that the business makes sense is if you actually can sell tickets and bring people out. But one interesting point you just brought up as well is that a lot of these organizations, the tickets are even just like a small part of that. And it's really about like the food and the beverages. That is where the true revenue is generated. So, for an artist who's listening to this right now, who is kind of taking this in, and maybe they're relatively early on, maybe they've done the work of, and let's imagine too that like their music's actually really good. Well, let's imagine that they've co-written a bunch of songs. They have an EP they feel really proud of. They have about 4 songs that were professionally produced. The music's 10 out of 10, like A+. And now they're looking at, I want to start expanding to some of these opportunities, and I want to start, to kind of build a live show business. It sounds like, your recommendation is, hey, the way to do that is really to start by building your fan base, by actually like getting to about 20 people who are coming out to the shows, maybe even before you do a deep dive into some of these bigger opportunities. What would your recommendation be for artists who are kind of at that place and they're looking at, yeah, how do I get those first 20 people to come out to the show? And then how do I start to expand from there?
Well, I would say, one of the better things that I've experienced in my personal live music career is that like the majority of the art that I've been a part of has been good to great. I always like to look at music through the eyes of, the general population, not from my own personal biases. Although I have a very eclectic, background of what I do listen to. But I would like to say that overall, like everything's pretty solid. So like I get like you're getting at like what differentiates them, right? So what I always say to artists when they're early starting out is I ask them, why are you doing this? Are you doing it for fun? Are you doing it for money? Or are you doing it for a career? Those are three very different paths, and understanding all three of those paths, I think, is beneficial for people. Like I'm a singer-songwriter. I was in a band myself, right? And I started out doing it in the guise of a career, right? I wanted to be a professional musician, right? But very quickly within that time, I was like, you know what? I think I'm just going to be doing this for fun, because the other way wasn't working out the way that I thought it was, probably because I wasn't really that as good as I could have been, artistically speaking. I thought it was pretty good, but not terrible, I would say. So if you're doing it let's talk about for money, right? We'll start there. Because the for money thing is like, how am I getting paid tomorrow? How am I going to make rent? I'm low on bills. This is my skill set. This is the only thing I can do, right? So if you're going down the path for money, you're doing cover music. If you're a solid musician, learn to play all the top 40 hits right now. Go to the local bars on Main Street, USA, even in the major cities, and go look where there's live music, and they'll pay you. And they'll pay you decent money too to do that. If you're good, they'll pay you good money. And that's the way to do it. If you're doing it with a band, like there's huge cover acts, like 90s cover acts and, modern cover acts, weddings you can play. Like here are all the different things that you can do for money, right? And then there's for fun. If you want to do it for fun, right? You do it for fun. You go, hey, I want to get a bunch of my friends together. We're going to play our music, right? Or we're going to play covers, whatever floats your boat, whatever makes you, smile at the end of your long work week. And then you take the opportunities that make sense for you and you enjoy it and you have fun because you don't have expectations for money or career. But career-wise, it doesn't start with money. It starts with the path of actually growing a small business. And that's why they say small businesses take 5 years to actually start turning a profit. That's why they say festivals take a few years to start turning a profit. Everything is a small business and everything takes time, right? To grow that career type of business. So how are you going to start? First, it starts with content, right? So you mentioned this hypothetical artist has some really good stuff. It has some recorded stuff, right? You got to go out. You got to obviously get your music distributed, go out to the many tools. And I saw some of your other podcasts. You've had some good guests that work for some distribution companies. Get up on all the different DSPs, the streamers out there. Start there. Start building your brand. Start building your link tree. Start utilizing the tech that's out there. Make sure you have an EPK. Make sure you have that or a website. Make sure your social presence is building. Make sure you're churning content. Make sure you're not spending all of your time on the live show or all of your time on the non-live, right? There's really good tools out there like Song Tools. Sonicbids is as part of Song Tools recently. They help get your music out there and different curators in the digital space. And I think that is as important today as the live show is, which I also, again, we're talking about inventory. We're talking about supply and demand here, right? So luckily, the world has become more digital, right? But the live thing is still such a necessary component of what you're doing when you're building your brand as a musician. So spending your time equally digitally and IRL is key, right? So spending your time, maybe you're getting together for a rehearsal with your act, whatever your artist act may be, on a once a week basis. Maybe also once a week, you're putting 2 hours into content creation, right? However, and that's the thing, the more hours you're able to put into this project, the more likely we will succeed, and the go-to-market of your own personal project will be more successful. Now, I think taking a look at your own personal network and where you are and what that personal network will do to support you is important as well. Like, it's tough for some musicians. Maybe they're not type A. Maybe they're introverts, right? Maybe they don't have a huge like social network, right? So maybe it's going to be a little bit more difficult for them to get a bunch of friends and family out to support them live, right? So what are you going to do? So then you got to build that online fan base first. That's what you have to lean into. You can leverage whatever you can leverage, right? And like I said, unfortunately, it's Darwinistic. If you're not good enough to build an online presence and you're not putting the hours in to build that online presence, and you don't have that fan base, then it's not going to work out for you. But if you are a really solid musician and you're building some really great art, some really awesome content, if you put the hours in, you'll gain that fan base online. Yeah, I think that even following some social media marketing trends, like Googling social media marketing, going really deep into how brands and businesses approach different social media marketing on their platforms, you should be taking those same lessons and ingesting them as your own brand of artist. And look, I think some of this stuff, sometimes people don't want to hear, right? Because they're like, oh, I don't want to change who I am for the almighty dollar, right? But then cool, go do it for fun. That's your option, right? That's, if you're doing it for career, that's one thing. And there's also been awesome success stories from artists that don't do live stuff at all. You don't need it necessarily. I think eventually you're going to have to do it, but there's been famous artists that have made their way. I think like Greta Van Fleet, one of their first live performances was SNL because they built such a solid online presence before then. They still have a really solid fan base, but there's ways around it, but you're never going to get away with, you're never going to find a shortcut essentially, because there's too many people out there trying to find that shortcut right now, I think. So there's the different avenues. I don't know if that's a long-winded way or maybe too generalist to the right answer, but there it is.
I think that totally makes sense. Yeah, it sounds like what you're sharing is that really like the number one fundamental is that you need to build a community. You need to build a community. You need to have an audience, and that people should take a look at how are online businesses right now building audience using social media, using digital marketing tools. Live events are one way to build, but it's not the only way. You can use online tools. I don't know if you knew this about me or my band before, Modern Musician, Dan, but like how we got our start, because our music was not great. Like if someone looks up The Secret to Dropping Out by Paradise Fears, then it's probably going to hurt your ears a little bit because you were just starting out as garage band in high school. But we were able to build our initial audience because we ran into the same problem. How do we get people to come out to our shows? We lived in Vermillion, South Dakota. We didn't have access to a wide music market, but we noticed that our favorite bands, when they would perform, had huge lines of fans, like thousands of people waiting outside the venue on the sidewalk. And so we started to walk up to people waiting in lines for shows and introduce ourselves and share some clips of our songs. And that worked so well that we split up into groups of two, and there were 6 of us in the band. We followed different tours around the country for about 6.5 months. And that was kind of what led us to being able to book opening tours for bigger artists and having an audience. And we call that tour hacking now, but just one example of, building a community, building a relationship. And, like you're saying, that it seems like that's the most important asset or the most important thing. And the music is like a medium through which you can build community, but alone, like there's a lot of people making really good music. So it's hard to just rely on that without having that relationship building, without having the connection.
There's something that I got out of that story, which I did not know that. I think that's so perfect because I think what we're both kind of saying is that, look, it's hard work and self-awareness, right? Like you guys were self-aware enough to know where your pitfalls were as a project together, as a group, and you used hard work to overcome those things. And you got to a point, to the successes at least that you were pursuing, through self-awareness and through hard work. And it's all the panels and all the podcasts and all the educational things that are out there, and in every different kind of line of work too, in every different industry, it really comes down to like, are you going to stay up late when you're tired? Are you going to send that extra email? Are you going to push through? Right. And I think a really important part of like these things, that was also what we're talking about, is like understanding how the structure of these industries work. I think that is not a readily available thing. I teach a class at NYU, concert management, and I learn a lot from the kids that I teach there about what they do and don't know. about the industry, right? And like every kid I talk to when they start out, in the music industry program there is like, I want to be an A&R. Everyone wants to be an A&R. And nowadays, more and more people want to be producers and DJs, but A&R continues to be the cliche. And there's just not a lot of A&R reps out there. Like there's metrics behind how you could actually be a working actor or actress more likely than you could be an A&R rep, just from the number of people who attempt to do that thing and the number of people who actually can pay their rent around it and actually get a job in that. But I think that the reason that is like understanding that within the music industry, all the different facets, all the different kinds of things that there is to understand, from agencies to management to record labels to promoters, like I was saying before, right? The benefits of finding a local promoter, if you have one, compared to going directly to a venue, is like a small lesson on the structure that I think is important. And look, street teaming that you did, it's mind blowing. That's like an OG, like completely just tried and true form of like, if you're going to hustle, if you're going to put the hours into something, something's going to come out of it. You're going to make something positive come out of the hours that you put it in, and that's great. I love that. Here it is.
Absolutely. I don't know if you knew this when you just said Street Team, but Street Team is also the name of digital software platform, the software as a service that we've been building for artists that right now it's in private beta for our clients, but it's sort of like if Patreon and Discord and Instagram had a baby, then it would be like this Street Team community platform. But it's built up around that concept of, what was a street team back in the day? Like a group of fans who love an artist so much, they hit the streets to promote the band. And usually did it to volunteer for free, but it wasn't really for free. They were kind of doing it in exchange for status or reputation or access to the artist. They might get a backstage pass or something like that.
There's a group of people I know who work at like in the Relics Dayglow ecosystem, and they all worked for Guster. They used to be a Guster rep. They would do street teaming and all the stuff at their colleges in return for like, signed merch or tickets. That's one of the reasons that like Guster is still has such longevity and they have such a solid fan base, and it's such a kind of a niche band in a lot of ways, but they just had such a great career because how creative they've always been when it comes to their marketing and supporting their fan base and connecting with that fan base. I'd love to learn more about your street team app, man.
Cool. Yeah, let's definitely connect on it. One other question I had for you, and this is going to be zooming out a little bit and kind of looking at where things are going. And obviously, when you start looking at the future, it doesn't exist yet. So like we're going to be sort of, theorizing around things. But, right now it's such an interesting time to be an artist or just to be alive, honestly, with AI and generative artwork. And also as it relates to live music, I know a week or two ago at the time of recording this, Meta announced their Orion glasses, which are like AR glasses that sort of represent like a big breakthrough because it's not a big bulky headset, but it's actually a thing that sort of blends the lines between, normal life and augmented reality. Curious to hear your perspective as someone that works a lot with live, music, and clearly, there's something about the sweat coming off of other people when you're at a live show and the connection and like being together with people. But also, there's something to say about, the rise of digital and the trend towards more and more things in like a digital environment. So I'm curious to hear your perspective on where things are headed there.
I love that. Okay. So I'll start with my worst case scenario. My nightmare, as I say I said this to someone this week, my nightmare is that my kids one day go, Dad, this is my favorite artist, and it's an AI program DJ. That's my nightmare. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I really, really don't. I think one of the best things that you can look at, and look, big tech and private equity and VC can throw as much money as they want at shit. You can come up with an idea and you can force it down people's throats as much as you want. But at the end of the day, like the longevity of things comes down to logic, I think. And this is, again, my own personal opinion on it is like, I think that you look at the pandemic and the dozens, if not hundreds of startups that came about with streaming concerts during the pandemic. I don't even know how many are left. They all went off of like, oh, One Direction did like this huge concert, got millions of viewers. Of course they fucking did. Of course they did. Right. But that doesn't mean that everyone's going to do that. There's all these startups that came on and we're almost hoping the pandemic lasted longer. My opinion on the streaming thing is it's a microcosm into looking of like that VR, AR future of consuming music. Now, those techs could replace Spotify, could replace CDs, right? Like cassettes, CDs, streaming, or MP3 players. What was it? God, I forgot. Through Napster, and then Spotify, and then maybe the next thing is AR VR, right? But I do not think that until we replace who we are, like biologically, that the live experience is ever going to be replaced, because they just tried it and it didn't work. I actually talk about this with groups of people, and I'm like, show of hands, how many people saw a streaming concert before, right? And day after day, that answer becomes lower and lower and lower, right? And then I'll say, keep your hands up if you saw two, right? And then most of them go down. I watched one of my favorite artists do live, and it just depressed me during the pandemic that I wasn't able to go out. And I think some of the technological breakthroughs and directions in that way, they're almost hoping for another pandemic. And I'm like, listen, if we have another pandemic, we're not going to be worried about how we're consuming media at that point. We're going to be worried about how we're, getting food and clean water, right? So music is going to take a back seat to everything else. I think the overarching direction of music tech and the music industry, I think, is going to continue to go towards a more logical standpoint. Right now, it is very much the Wild West post-pandemic. Like I said, people lost millions and millions of dollars of VC cash during 2019 and 2021 in some of these ventures and others. But yeah, other than the AR VR thing, which, unless I'm completely wrong and Gen Alpha doesn't want to go out anymore, right? And we're all living in a Ready Player One future. If that's the case, it's going to suck anyway. But I do think that there's plenty of different ways that we are moving forward as an industry, and we are moving forward as a media consumption outlet. On the industry side, there is AI, and I think AI does have some really good applications within this space, such as like suggestions. We're working on a tool right now that's going to be able to suggest for our artists where they should be playing, so they don't try to play Coachella based on a lot of different data metrics that we're collecting. Where there's AI mastering tools. Maybe you don't want to drop a ton of cash mastering your album, right? Maybe not ready yet. There's AI for that. I think that's cool. Mixing and mastering AI, that's fine. There is something to be said of the nuance of working with a real producer, right? But they're expensive, and maybe you don't have the money for that early on, right? I think it's important to look at AI as a tool and not as a replacement as we go on and move forward within that technological output. I think overall in the ecosystem, there's a focus on curation in the space. And like I said, making sure your digital footprint matches your IRL footprint. And I think that you're taking some of your energy away from the IRL and the live side, but I think you're just matching that digitally. And I think that's where we're going to continue to naturally progress as an industry as a whole. I do not think, or actually not think, I know that the technology is not where it can be for the music industry compared to other industries. There's plenty of advancements that we can use and utilize from other, whether it be fintech or even like industrial tech or energy technology, that we can utilize those technologies that exist because they're a larger industry, right? And that's why they have tech that's further ahead. But we can use those lessons, we can use those tools to integrate into our ecosystem as a music industry. And I wouldn't say necessarily change or disrupt, but improve the flow of everything. Because the more you can do, the more time that you can put into things, the more successful you're going to be across the board. I think at the end of the day, the same struggles are going to continue to be there. They always will be for artists, no matter the medium. But there are some really cool technological advances that I think are taking place and will take place over the next couple of years that will assist those artists that really should be out there, right? That are struggling in some realm, in some way, to start to be seen more. And I think that's an important thing as well.
Awesome. I love this stuff. And, it sounds like one of the main takeaways that you recommend for artists who are looking at the future is to look at AI as a tool that can extend the creativity, but not as a replacement. And through the combination of humans using AI, It can help to reduce, it can help to do things faster, but ultimately that creative spark also connected with a human is something that's ultimately creating better quality content than a human alone or an AI alone. And I think we're both knocking on wood that we don't have that day where your kids are listening to AI DJ and that's the main artist.
I mean, it's just like a dystopian future, right? If that's where we end up, like it's just going to be generally dystopian anyway, right? Which, you said we're living in interesting times. I agree. Sometimes terrifying could be the word for it as well, depending on what you're looking at. But yeah, I mean, I feel like the future of this industry will coincide with the brightness of our general future, and the future is bright, I think.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I think there's a bias towards goodness. But yeah, I mean, it's also interesting. You mentioned as it relates to digital concerts versus like live concerts, how we've experienced what happened with the pandemic when everything went virtual, and it just wasn't the same. It didn't have the same level of depth. And there's a point that you said specifically, or like I think the wording was around, at least until humans can like augment our biological networks or something like that.
Yeah,
it reminded me. We interviewed Noland Arbaugh on our podcast about a month and a half ago, and the episode's about to come out. He's the first human to have a Neuralink installed. We created the first song ever telepathically. So he used his Neuralink and Udio.com, an AI platform, to make music with his thoughts. And it was absolutely remarkable. And so he has the funny little like seed to plant there. It's like, yeah, maybe someday in the future, if we're able to like literally have some sort of Matrix type of situation, maybe at that point.
Maybe. I don't know about you, but I don't even like the fucking flu shot. So I'm not getting something put in my brain.
I mean, to be fair though, it's Elon Musk who created Neuralink. So, everyone, you probably trust him, right?
Yeah.
I know. Depending on who you ask, like that's got Elon such a controversial figure right now.
Yeah, he really is. I mean,
but if just like that idea of like, hey, like, someone can have access to your thoughts, and it could potentially go two ways. It's talking about potential dystopian, but also, I mean, like the flip side of that too is like, we could potentially communicate telepathically with each other, and literally like same way we have language, but language is sort of flawed and it's easy to misinterpret. It is slow. It's really slow compared to like how fast we think. So there are remarkable, benefits, especially in the case of, people who are quadriplegic or, are able to regain the ability to see again because they lost their sight.
That shit's awesome. I love that, obviously.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the main angle that they're taking right now. But also in the future, it kind of opens up some interesting territory. So I'm sure we'll explore that together as if and when we approach the
I mean, like
situation.
I said, my kids, right? Like my kids don't even like going to the dentist, so I don't think they're getting a Neuralink anytime soon. But
I think most people have asked like, hey, like, you want to get a brain surgery? That one's gonna be a tough cookie to crack.
Yeah, I mean, look, maybe if they get to a point like sci-fi wise where you just put something here like beep, right, and it just works and it's activated, by all means, maybe people will go in that direction. But
yeah, I know. Ray Kurzweil is one of my favorite authors, and he's talking about nanotechnology. Like, he thinks that'll be sort of the way that we have neural interfaces. But it's an interesting world. Well, Dan, thank you so much again for taking the time to hop on here and share some perspective around artists who are starting out. How can, in real, like, down to earth, grounded, realistic, kind of advice on how they can build a music business. Hopefully people who are watching this feel inspired. And for anyone that's listening or watching this right now who wants to explore Sonicbids more or dive a bit deeper, what would be the best place for them to go to connect more?
Yeah, so you can go to sonicbids.com. You could always reach out to me over LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat with especially up-and-coming musicians, however way I can help. And I always like to meet musicians. If you're in the New York area, especially, reach out. And we're about to, like I said, we've partnered with Song Tools officially. We're about to announce some other really cool partnerships. Our tech is going to have a complete, amazing facelift over the next couple of months. Our new MVP is going to launch what looks like in the next 4 to 6 weeks. We're really excited to show the world what we've been working on for myself for the last 10 years. And I know it's going to help everybody. So that's going to be kind of cool to see.
Super cool. All right. Well, like always, put the links in the show notes for easy access. And Dan, thanks again for taking the time to be here today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Michael. Great chatting, man. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.